What is up, everybody? Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. We're going to be talking about old Mo, Moses. I loved watching the Ten Commandments movie growing up. Charleston Heston stole the show, of course. It's a fantastic, fun movie to watch. And, my whole life I was believing in this story, that this was really how God came to reveal himself to mankind, specifically through the nation of Israel. And I had no clue that there were real scholars when I was a young Christian who actually believed that Moses may not have even existed, that he may have been an invention. It was just 8 to 10 years ago that I discovered that there is a growing trend of critical scholars, and has been for decades now, that thinks that Moses was invented sometime in the 8th, 7th century BCE, roughly in that period. They tried to paint him as if he's in the Bronze Age. And as I did MythVision, and you just get deeper and deeper into the weeds of learning more from critical scholars, you realize there's a growing trend of critical scholars who think old Mo may have been invented in the Persian or even Hellenistic period. For those of you who caught the live stream the other day with Dr. Aaron Adair, that was an interesting discussion where he points out the later Persian idea that Moses was invented around then. I mentioned I had a documentary, but some of you may or may not have watched that documentary. So I kind of wanted to hang out tonight with you and play it and take questions, comments, super chats, whatever you guys want to throw at me along the way. And I want you to see a well-polished video where I articulate this in great depth. I want to give a special shout out to Paul Davidson, who helped me craft this. He's also like-minded, thinking deeply about these things as well. And so I want to get into that. And I have a book, Bruce Loudon's book up, which is, I'm going to show you the e-version, Homer's Odyssey in the Near East, where he compares to the Greek myth the episode with the golden calf, Moses and the golden calf with Aaron, to an episode from the Odyssey. It'll be cool to check that out. I want to give you the teaser too. For those who are actually watching these live streams, thank you so much. Like the videos, share them out there. I have some people complaining the intros are too long for the live stream, but I have to explain that it takes people a few minutes to even get notified by YouTube that we are live. So I would have to manually go in after each live stream to cut out that 2 minutes, 45 seconds intro. Forgive me in advance. This is just my way of, getting people enough time to join the live stream. Okay. Now, tomorrow I'm doing a live stream on Dionysus, Jesus and Dionysus. I say Jesus equals Dionysus, but really John's painting him as a greater Dionysus, greater than the god Dionysus. And Bruce Loudon's book, again, he covers this in 2 different books. But in this video that I'm going to show you today, this is pushing the envelope. I don't know if anyone's really pushed it this far other than Gad Barnea, other than, Aaron Adair's highlighting this as well. And I want you to be front row seat in seeing it. So there you have it. Real quick. What's up, Leb? Good to see you, Leb. Intrepid storytelling. I don't want to say intrepid if it isn't intrepid, but thank you so much for being here, watching while sitting in the car, line up to pick up my kids from school. Gotta pick those kids up from school. Yeshua in the house. Symbolic studies. Good to see you. I'm picking up the wrong mic. Is my mic screwed? Sound good, bit off. So my audio might suck. And I say that right now because I've got a computer on the way. I've been trying to save up to get this computer. This one isn't cutting it. The audio is just sucking. So we'll get to the video in just a moment, and it won't have this problem. Let me see something. Audio is a bit off. Let me try this. Is it
this? How's this? How's that? Everybody in the chat, let me know if the audio is good. Press 1 if this is better, because I might have had the wrong setting. Like press 1 saying, hey, this is the audio. This is much better. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a pop here and there. Okay, people are saying I'm good now. Okay, much better. You're good now. Ones. It was good at first. Okay. Huh. It probably depends on what you're listening through, because if you have a really good headset, you'll pick up that my audio was sucky. Bakken in the house. Love to see you're doing a side-by-side with a polished video, bro. This is going to be fire. We put so much work into some of these documentaries. I can't wait for everybody to check out this video with me. And I've had discussions with some really, really smart people, way smarter than me, that study this stuff in their actual languages and stuff. And, you know, they find this quite attractive. Anywho, if you'd like, I'll go ahead and start the video. I think it's worth playing the movie, letting you see the quality. You're going to hear it's way better sounding than even this. And I'll try to stop periodically to make comments along the way. Things that I was like, man, that's such a good observation. I really wanted to sell that to you. I wanted you to see what I was seeing. And if you have any super chats, questions, comments, whatever, super chat them in. You can interrupt at any time. Let's check this out together. So it's called The Invention of Yahweh Will Blow Your Mind. #1 Moses documentary. There's my hubris, okay? I said it was #1. I want you to judge. At the end of this video, I want you to judge and tell me if this is not the best Moses critical scholarly documentary on the internet. Here we go.
In the Old Testament, one patriarch stands above all the rest in terms of his importance to the story of Israel, and he still exerts profound influence in modern-day Western culture. Thousands of years later. We're talking about Moses, of course.
Oh, freaking snap. Oh, freaking digga snap. Ramesses Desosmayim. Oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher your name. How can I pronounce this? You know I'm the worst at pronouncing things. I have become a big fan of your work. It's so illuminating. Keep it up. Thank you so much. Oh, I know what I was going to say now that you brought that up, because I had a brain fog there. I'm editing a video right now where 2 Polish scholars, they have a heavy accent, one of them less so than the other. I'm putting some transcripts together, going to put on captions. It's going to take a little time to edit. Comparing Genesis, Garden of Eden, to Homer's Ogygia and Odysseus. I know it sounds like, what? How? You're just going to have to watch. You're just going to have to see. I think they hit it. But seriously, thank you for this $50 super chat. I have become a big fan of your work. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. The hard work is paying off, obviously, and it's encouraging to keep going. Thank you so much for that. Everybody in the chat, show some love to the super chatter who just dropped a 50 bomb on us. I'm going to keep it up for a minute while we play the documentary. Thank you so much, my friend.
Our religious traditions tell us that it was Moses who performed signs and wonders in the presence of the Pharaoh and his magicians, that it was Moses who inspired a nation of slaves to follow him out of captivity in Egypt and into the wilderness, that it was Moses who led those same Israelites in violent crusades against enemy tribes, and that it was Moses who gave them the laws and monotheistic principles that their society would follow for the rest of time. And yet, we now know that these stories are not literally true. The quest to find archaeological evidence for slavery in Egypt, for the sojourn in the wilderness, for the conquest of the Amorites and the Midianites, and for the institution of the law in ancient Israel has turned up nothing. Moses himself is a phantom. If none of the acts attributed to him actually happened, then who is he? How did these stories develop? What real-world situation caused the Judeans to promote Moses as the founder of their ancient nation? Although it is widely assumed that the Moses tradition must be very old, that assumption is sorely lacking in evidence. Ancient records are silent about Moses. Inscriptions, seals, and other texts from ancient Israel and Judah never mention Moses or any of the other Israelite patriarchs. Records from the Babylonian and Persian periods say nothing. The ancient coinage from the province of Yehud says nothing. The Elephantine papyri from the Persian-era Judeans and Israelites in Egypt show zero awareness of Moses and the Torah. The same goes for the Aramaic Hermopolis letters, Papyrus Amherst 63, the Aramaic Padua papyri, and so on. Even if absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, the pattern gives us reason to doubt. 50 years ago, it was daring to suggest that Moses was not a historical individual. Today, it is daring to suggest that our stories about Moses developed as late as the Hellenistic period. Yet, that seems to be the direction scholarship is heading. If you're open to new ideas, join us as we examine the oldest known stories of Moses and present an alternate view based on that evidence. The dating of the Hebrew Bible is a topic that remains unresolved. Many traditions and myths found among its pages are old indeed, but the text itself did not reach its final form until the Hellenistic period. If this claim is false, it should not be hard to disprove. A single manuscript find could change everything. But we're not holding our breath. Dr. Gad Barnea, a historian at the University of Haifa, after examining every surviving Jewish document from the Persian period, recently stated that there is literally zero evidence for any knowledge of and any familiarity with the Bible at that time. We may not know how far back the stories of Abraham, Moses, Joshua, Deborah, David, Solomon, Esther, Daniel, and other Bible heroes go. All we can say is that no one seems to have written anything down about them until after Alexander the Great and his empire introduced Greek literature, philosophy, and culture to the Near East. So what about Moses? We mainly know of Moses from the books of the Pentateuch. The book of Deuteronomy is thought to tell the oldest version of his story, with Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers being later accretions. The story they tell is filled with improbable and fantastic elements, not to mention historical anachronisms and internal contradictions that indicate a work of creative literature. When we look at the rest of the Bible, references to Moses are surprisingly rare. The book of Ezekiel does not mention him even once. In Isaiah, only the final section known as Trito Isaiah, written long after the rest of the book, mentions Moses. In Jeremiah, Moses appears just once. He is absent from the old prophetic books of Amos and Hosea, as well as Obadiah, Jonah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah and Zechariah. Micah and Malachi have one mention each in passages that are arguably late and perhaps Hellenistic. Broadly speaking, the earlier the text, the less important Moses is. In the Hellenistic period, we begin to find references to Moses outside the Bible. These references, however, only add to our uncertainty. Because if the Pentateuch was well known by that point, we would expect such stories to follow it closely. Instead, they diverge greatly from the narrative of the Pentateuch. If those authors did not learn of Moses from Jewish writings, then where did their knowledge come from? Some years ago, Old Testament professor Philip R. Davies urged caution about treating the canonical Bible as superior to other traditions. We do not know the date and origin of the canonized story or its sources, and thus we cannot assume either that it constitutes the standard version by which to judge the conformity or deviation of other accounts. Let's examine those divergent Moses traditions, guided by the work of modern critical scholars, and see where they lead us.
Since we're diving into the legendary figure of Moses in this documentary, I think this might be an ad. What is this? Let's see. It's the perfect time to introduce today's sponsor. Yeah, I had a sponsor back then. Wish I had more. Could use it. What does the evidence in ancient Israel? Did Jews need to follow all the laws given to Moses to achieve salvation? Moses is one of history's most iconic figures. Myth at checkout. Okay, here we go. Hecataeus of Abdera. Here we are. Moses in this documentary. Hecataeus of Abdera and Theophanes of Mytilene. Here we go. By the way, these are external sources. So they're the first sources that pop up outside of the Bible that mention the name Moses. This is very important because you would imagine to strengthen the case internally, you want external sources. Like we do have external sources that talk about some of the kings or, Hezekiah, for example, external to the Bible. That will help you know whether or not a person likely existed or not, or whether they're much more reliable historically. Moses doesn't get any of that until the Hellenistic period, and these authors are in the Hellenistic period.
Hecataeus of Abdera was a Greek historian who lived during the 4th century BCE. His book on Egypt, called Aegyptiaca, contains the earliest datable references to Moses that we know of. It was probably written between 320 and 315 BCE. The book survives only in fragments quoted in another work, Bibliotheca Historica by Diodorus Siculus, a historian of the 1st century BCE. Those passages are preserved in turn by the writing of Photius, a 9th century patriarch of the Orthodox Church. So we're dealing with quotations of Hecataeus. Furthermore, as several recent scholars have recognized, Diodorus's quotations of Hecataeus appear to be mixed with material from another source, possibly the biography of Pompey, written by Theophanes of Mytilene in the 1st century BCE. Pompey was the general who captured Jerusalem and looted the Jewish temple in 63 BCE. For this section, we will follow the analysis of Russell Gamirkan for distinguishing between the material from these two authors. Another well-known scholar, Daniel Schwartz, ascribes less of the material to Hecataeus than Gamirkan does, but that would not affect our conclusions in this video. In Book 1, Diodorus quotes the following passage from Hecataeus about how the Egyptians were the founders of many colonies around the world. Now, the Egyptians say that also after these events, A great number of colonies were spread from Egypt all over the inhabited world. To Babylon, for instance, the colonists were led by Belus, who was held to be the son of Poseidon and Libya. And after establishing himself on the Euphrates River, he appointed priests called Chaldeans by the Babylonians. They say those who set forth with Danaus, likewise from Egypt, settled what is practically the oldest city of Greece, Argos, and that the nation of the Colchis in Pontus and that of the Jews, which lies between Arabia and Syria, were founded as colonies by certain immigrants from their country. This is the reason why it is a long-established institution among these two peoples to circumcise their male children, the custom having been brought over from Egypt. This idea that many of the world's nations were colonies of Egypt, though not at all true, is an important element in the development of the Moses story. In Book 40 of Bibliotheca Historica.
Oh, snap. We got a super duper here real quick. Steve in the house. Thank you, Steve, for the super chat. I don't think there is a tradition. I think Exodus is a historical novel written specifically for the Torah. It's the Da Vinci Code of its time. Steve, you wouldn't be, I don't know about the Da Vinci Code part, but I guess you could say, I do think it's a literary crafty invention by these authors. It's very playful. And if you look at the priestly tradition of the Exodus or Exodus motifs, you don't find this full-blown Exodus story we have with Moses. So I do think someone later wrote a hell of a story, wrote a hell of a novelistic style, if you will, story. Now, what's interesting, if you really want to take this further, there's a book. Let me pull it up because it's worth everybody knowing about. If you really want to check out this Hellenistic side of things, this might captivate you, okay? Let me grab this book here. I don't have the paperback to it, but I am going to show you this on screen. This is a must get for anybody who really wants to take this further. I hope it's showing. Yes. Okay, here we are. Argonauts of the Desert, Structural Analysis of the Hebrew Bible, Philip Wagenbaum. I hope I pronounced it right, but this is a must get. It's a Copenhagen book, and he shows other novels. It's funny you use the term novel. I believe the term novel is used. Other novels that were written, and a lot of them are like romantic novels where a queen gets captured by the Pharaoh of Egypt and she's taken in, and then her brother, scare quotes, her brother comes in to tell her, hey, dad has a funeral. Our father died. I must take my sister with me, and I'll bring her right back. But really, it was her lover, not her brother. And so they ask for a religious right to go off into the wilderness to do this ritual that honors the death of their father, and they'll come back. But they're trying to escape. Where have I heard this before? Well, this is in Greek writings that are around the same time in the Hellenistic period. And Philip Wagenbaum saw these parallels and thought, damn, are they writing novels and like comparing this fictional story of the Exodus of Moses with the well-known kind of romantic novels that we see of the time? I don't know. You be the judge. Go check out the book. The book is Argonauts of the Desert. Philip Wagenbaum wrote it. And what he does, he takes the first opening just to try to lay out a case and say, listen, if this is later, if we can grant the biblical text are later, then what we have is literature that's written around the same time as Plato and other figures. There's a good chance the influence shows the parallels, that there's some connection. And, you know, some of them are weaker than other connections. Some of them are stronger, but it's still fascinating. And I think you can get a lot out of this. Must read. Thank you so much, Steve. You put your finger on something that I think most people don't know about. That's why I thought it's worth plugging this. But again, we are dealing with at best, historical fiction. Someone who's trying to tell you oh, this is what happened, but it's a well-crafted story. That is where I'm at with this. So, Steve, thank you so much for the super chat. Feel free to interrupt anybody with the super chats. I'm taking them because they keep the lights on here, and the house doesn't pay for itself. Let's keep it real. So, thank you so much, Steve. Let's continue having some fun diving into this thing. I hope you're enjoying the documentary. Everybody in the chat right now, if you're enjoying the documentary, press 1. There's 200 and something people total that I'm streaming to here. Press 1 if you're on the YouTube side at all, saying, hey, let's keep it going with this documentary. We got Recording King in the house. We got Wade Rogers. We got Cardiac, Turbos, Steve, Mana, Beach, Comer, Jerry, Yeshua, Homand, Iam. Wade's dropping another one. He's not playing. He said, play the damn movie. Okay. The Mormon Atheist, my dog's homework was eaten. Okay. Said one. Lisa said one. Alan said one. Uncle Jersey, even Uncle Jersey said one. Okay. Doc in the house is diagnosing us with a 1. Pi is telling us 11111. DJ Frank's giving us 1. Come on. Deborah King's in the house talking about, I'm watching it. Play the damn thing. And then Bakken said, give me that 1. Give me 1. I want 1. All right, let's keep going. Thank you so much for that. Anna. No audio? You got to be kidding me. Oh, I'm glad you caught that before it was like 3 minutes in. All right. We're no audio. Here we go.
It's the Roman war against Judea. And he begins by explaining to his readers who the Jews are. Quoting Hecataeus, he says
I was testing you all. I wanted to see how good your ears were working. That's all that was. That was not intentional. No, that was intentional. Who gives a crap? Let's keep going.
Following. The colony of Judea was headed by a man named Moses, outstanding both for his wisdom and courage. On taking possession of the land, he founded, besides other cities, one that is now the most renowned of all, called Jerusalem. In addition, he established the temple that they hold in chief veneration, instituted their forms of worship and ritual, drew up the laws relating to their political institutions, and ordered them. Although this sounds superficially like the Moses of the Bible, none of the details are the same. Whatever Hecataeus' source for this legend about Moses was, it was not the book of Exodus. Hecataeus knows nothing of the captivity of the Jews, of Moses' role as a deliverer, or of the wonders performed by Moses and Aaron. According to Hecataeus, Moses did not die in the wilderness, but went all the way to Jerusalem, where he personally founded the city, its temple, and Judea's political institutions. Moses is clearly regarded as a lawgiver, but not in connection with the books of the Torah. Gamirkin observes, by the time of Hecataeus, we may begin to speak of the laws of Moses. One cannot yet speak of the books of Moses. Now, Hecataeus visited Thebes in person in order to write his book on Egyptian history that Diodorus is quoting from. Gamirkin suggests the possibility that Hecataeus learned about Moses the lawgiver from the priests in Egypt and drew his own conclusion that Moses had also been the founder of Jerusalem, since this was the typical pattern in Greek founder legends. Next, Diodorus says the following about Moses. He also divided the people into 12 tribes, since this is regarded as the most perfect number and corresponds to the number of months that make up a year. Again, this might sound like an allusion to the Pentateuch, but the details don't line up. Hecataeus knows nothing about the story of Jacob and his 12 sons. Rather, he seems to be drawing on the Greek stereotype of 12 tribe alliances being the perfect political structure. For example, Plato, in Book 5 of Laws, describes the ideal country as one that is comprised of 12 territories and 12 tribes. The city shall be placed in a suitable situation, as nearly as possible in the center of the country, and shall be divided into 12 wards. 12 lots will be assigned to 12 gods, and they will give their names to the tribes. The divisions of the city shall correspond to those of the country. The 12 tribes shall allot among themselves annually the 12 divisions of the country, and each tribe shall appoint 5 wardens and commanders of the watch. Plato goes on to give further instructions regarding the 12 tribes, and he also explains that 12 is the ideal number because there are 12 months. In other words, this detail about Moses establishing 12 tribes due to the 12 months of the year more likely comes from Plato and Greek ideals rather than the Jewish scriptures. It would not be surprising for a Greek writer to assume that Moses, as a wise lawgiver, must have divided his country into 12 tribes. The next remarks by Diodorus appear to come from Theophanes of Mytilene instead of Hecataeus. Diodorus states, "But Moses had no images whatsoever of the gods made for them, being of the opinion that God is not in human form. Rather, the heaven that encompasses the earth is alone divine and rules everything." As we noted, Theophanes, who lived 300 years after Hecataeus, had written a book about the Roman general Pompey. The fact that the Jerusalem temple contained no images or statues of any kind was not widely known until Pompey ransacked the temple and found it empty. Thus, when Diodorus says that Moses put no images in the temple, his source must be later than Pompey's invasion. Next, Diodorus states that Moses instituted an antisocial and hostile religion due to the Judeans' expulsion from Egypt. This statement is incompatible with the early quotation of Hecataeus that said Moses was highly esteemed and that Judea was founded by Egyptians. Again, this must come from a later source than Hecataeus. Diodorus' next statement is plausibly from Hecataeus. Moses picked out the men of most refinement and with the greatest ability to head the entire nation, and appointed them priests, and he ordained that they should occupy themselves with the temple and the honors and sacrifices offered to their God. These same men he appointed to be judges in all major disputes, and entrusted to them the guardianship of the laws and customs. As before, the details here don't really align with the Pentateuch, but they are typical of Greek foundation stories.
Oh, snap! Thank you, Joel. Thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate the super sticker, actually. Thank you for that support. We really appreciate it. I want to pause and say this about the documentary. Since you didn't have a comment, I figured this is the perfect time to interrupt to say thank you, but also to say that if you notice these Greek external sources that mention Moses, calling him a lawgiver, dividing the nation by 12, and you also see there's obviously some kind of contradictory traditions, stories being told about him, even amongst the Greeks. This is an important point, because if the Exodus story was ancient, was old, was the standard, obvious Jewish story, Hecataeus' story about Moses leaves out and actually contradicts much of the biblical narrative. It does not align. You would think that if there was this popular story about the Exodus that was known that Jews were telling, Hecataeus would have been all over it. Clearly, there was some floating tradition about Moses, but we don't know what that looked like, and it likely did not have what we have in the Bible. You're going to see what I'm going to do throughout this video is point out how it looks like much of the internal evidence of the Bible is reacting to the external traditions by Greeks telling the story about the Jewish lawgiver, Moses. In defense of him, they are modifying the biblical Exodus story about Moses in light of those traditions floating around in the Hellenistic period. That's what you're going to notice. Joel, thank you so much for the super chat again. Keeping the lights on here at MythVision. We really, really appreciate you. You rock. Thank you so much. Oh, we got another one, Bakken, in the house. Thank you so much, Bakken, for the super. Moses not order sacrifices in earliest attestation. The sacrifice motif that we find in the Exodus story, I don't know. I don't know where to layer that, whether or not this is something that dates earlier. It's hard for me to think any of the Moses stories we read in Exodus are early. That is not to say that there isn't potentially some older traditions of Exodus material in the prophets, but Moses himself, I think, is a later invention. So the idea of sacrifices in the name of Moses being written in the Hellenistic period, it's worth checking to see whether or not the original scribes would have had that in there, or if this is just part of their story or not. I mean, I really don't know the answer to that question. It's a really, really good question to ask, because we know that there's difficulties in some of the priestly and scribal prophetic traditions about sacrificing animals. They do not agree. The Bible talks about this, right? Where prophets say the lying pen of the scribes. They're constantly complaining about priests that want to just sacrifice instead of just doing what's right, taking care of the widow, showing kindness to a stranger, loving and helping people who need it, who are hungry, feed them. Things like common sense things that are good things we've always thought were good. People were clearly not doing them according to one of these biblical authors, many of them actually, and they thought they could just pay a fee or sacrifice an animal and it was all good. And obviously we get the cry from God in those texts saying, I didn't want that. I just wanted you to do what was right. Anyway, thank you so much. Let's go back to the doc. Let's enjoy it. And here we are. Hopefully this time I keep the audio going.
Diodorus goes on to explain that the Judeans never have a king and are instead ruled by a priest. Gamirkin believes this comes from Theophanes, who was justifying Pompey's abolition of the short-lived Maccabean monarchy in favor of rule by the Judean high priest. After this, Diodorus quotes a paraphrase of Deuteronomy 28:69. These are the words that Moses heard from God and declares to the Jews. Gamirkin believes that this also comes from Theophanes. It would be strange for Hecataeus to quote from a book that he has systematically contradicted on every detail. To summarize so far, our earliest source on Moses is Hecataeus of Abdera, who probably wrote between 320 and 315 BCE. According to Hecataeus, Jerusalem was colonized by Egyptians under their ruler Moses, who was famous for his wisdom and courage. Moses founded the Jerusalem temple, instituted its laws, and divided Judea into 12 tribes in accordance with Plato's political philosophy. This story has echoes in the Pentateuch, yet nearly every detail differs from what the Bible actually says, and much of it is plausibly invented by Hecataeus himself. His actual knowledge about the Jews was meager. He shows no awareness of the Pentateuch or its contents. Our surviving fragments of Hecataeus are mixed with details taken from a later historian, probably Theophanes of Mytilene, who was writing almost 3 centuries later. Theophanes' knowledge of Moses and the Jerusalem temple come from his time as part of Pompey's entourage in 63 BCE. And he knows at least one quote attributable to Deuteronomy. Unlike Hecataeus, Theophanes had a rather negative view of the Jews, viewing their religious practices as deviant and hostile toward outsiders. And he doesn't view the Judeans as being Egyptian. We'll find out why in a bit. This brief outline of Moses' life remained influential for several centuries, even after the Pentateuch became widely available. Strabo's famous Geographica, first published in 7 BCE, states that Moses was an Egyptian priest who led a large group of thoughtful men to take over the humble city of Jerusalem. There, he established a place of worship and was reputed as a great leader. By the way, the quotations attributed to Hecataeus of Abdera by Josephus will not be covered here, because scholars have shown them to be a later pseudonymous forgery. That author, whoever he was, is now referred to as pseudo-Hecataeus by historians. The late Israeli Bible professor Moshe Weinfeld pointed out in a 1988 paper that although most genres of biblical literature have Near Eastern counterparts, the stories about patriarchs who settle Israel and establish its cities do not. Colonization and foundation stories, however, were a popular genre in the Greek world. Weinfeld identifies several narrative elements common in these Greco-Roman myths and shows how the same elements can be found in the Bible. For example, such stories typically start with a man who leaves a great civilization charged with a universal mission. Aeneas, for example, leaves the famous city of Troy and founds Alba Longa, the leader of the Latin League. Aeneas' descendants, Romulus and Remus, later found the city of Rome. Abraham is one prime example put forth by Weinfeld. But the tradition of Moses as an Egyptian who founds Jerusalem fits just as well, if not better. According to Weinfeld, Moses resembles both Romulus, the legendary settler of Rome, and Numa, the successor of Romulus, who established Rome's religious and political institutions. In a separate study, Catherine M. Stott has noticed that Livy's claim that the laws of Numa were discovered in his grave centuries later sounds a lot like the discovery of the laws of Moses in 2 Kings 22. Weinfeld also notes the remarkable parallels between the birth legends of Romulus and Remus on the one hand and Moses on the other. However, he stops short of explaining how it is that Greek myth genres and narrative patterns show up all over the Pentateuch, other than to say that petty states in the Eastern Mediterranean were formed under similar conditions to the Greek city-states. Gamirkin goes further than Weinfeld, especially in his 2016 book, Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible, where he argues that Jewish foundation stories are dependent on and inspired by the Greek ktisis, the foundation story genre. He writes, The story of the migration of the Israelites to the Promised Land under the leadership of Moses and his creation of a constitution and laws for the new nation closely conform to the conventions of the Greek foundation story, a story of the Jewish nation written by a Greek historian might have read much as the present text of Exodus to Joshua. Gamirkin also notes that the Jews living in Alexandria, the cosmopolitan Egyptian city where the Septuagint was produced, would have had access to a wide variety of current Greek literature through the Great Library of Alexandria. Now, let's look at some more Hellenistic Moses myths. Manetho was an Egyptian priest in the 3rd century BCE and a prolific writer of books in Greek. Around the year 285 BCE, a few decades after Hecataeus, he wrote a history of Egypt called the Aegyptiaca that was well known in antiquity. In fact, Manetho's innovation of dividing the Egyptian pharaohs into dynasties is still used by historians today. Though his work is invaluable to Egyptologists, it is also filled with myths and historical errors. Manetho wrote at least 2 stories about ancient foreigners being expelled from Egypt that are relevant to the Moses tradition. Though the originals are lost, the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus quoted from them in his work titled Against Apion, which was written to defend Judaism as a classical religion and philosophy. The first story is about the expulsion of the Hyksos from ancient Egypt. At first glance, this might seem irrelevant to the story of Moses, but there are important parallels we will point out. We should start by explaining who the Hyksos were. The 15th dynasty of Egypt consisted of several non-Egyptian kings, Canaanites most likely, who ruled over Lower Egypt for about a century, from 1650 to 1550 BCE. They were known in Egyptian as the Hekau-Kasut, which meant kings from foreign lands. This phrase later evolved into the Greek word Hyksos. In the end, these foreign rulers were expelled from Egypt by Pharaoh Ahmose I, and this event is the subject of Manetho's first story. Manetho is extremely critical of the Hyksos, saying they burnt Egyptian cities and razed its temples to the ground. He also says they treated the Egyptians cruelly, killing some and enslaving others. According to Gamirkin, Manetho's coloring of the Hyksos legend actually reflects the poor treatment of Egyptians by the Persians, especially Artaxerxes III, who lived much closer to Manetho's time. Around the year 340 BCE, Artaxerxes invaded Egypt, destroyed the walls of its cities, looted its temples, and instituted a reign of terror lasting 10 years. There are 2 important parallels with the Moses story to note here: the theme of foreigners in Egypt and the theme of enslavement. Manetho states that the Hyksos king Salitis established a stronghold in the city of Varus, which historically was indeed the Hyksos capital. He then explains the meaning of the name Hyksos, only he gets the explanation wrong. He says the name means shepherd kings, when it actually means foreign kings. Later, he offers an alternate translation of Hyksos, shepherd captives. This too is wrong. Turning to the Pentateuch, we are told in both the Joseph story and the Moses story that the Israelites in Egypt inhabited a place called Goshen, separate from the other Egyptians. Genesis 46:34 explains that this is because the Egyptians had great hatred for shepherds. Historically, this claim is utterly incorrect.
Oh, snap. We got a super chat, fam. Wade Rogers in the house with a super duper. Thank you, Wade. The Bible says there were 600,000 fighting age men in the Exodus. Archaeologist Israel Finkelstein says 0 physical trace. Desert couldn't handle that number, likely a vague memory of the Hyksos expulsion. There are some scholars who think the Hyksos expulsion has some background memory. Clearly the Bronze Age and then the collapse, a lot of people do have this idea of an exodus. A lot of people had to pack up and move and relocate. Yeah, so I don't really know for sure how much of the Hyksos plays a role, but as we were just listening to Manetho describe, Hyksos are a significant memory even in later Hellenistic Egyptian priests, historians, who are documenting what they think happened in the past, and even they're making mistakes. But is that laying in the background? Well, I cover more of that as we continue in this documentary. Wade, thank you so much for super chatting and being a member of the channel. Feel free to interrupt with any super chats, questions, comments, whatever. We really appreciate you. I'm going to continue our documentary.
Even in the Bible, the Egyptians themselves are shepherds. See Exodus 9, verse 3. And Egyptian inscriptions often tell of desert tribes taking refuge with their flocks in Egypt. This statement in Genesis can only be referring to the hatred of Egyptians toward the Hyksos, but that is incredibly odd because it means the author of Genesis has the same misunderstanding about the Hyksos that Manetho has. To restate the issue, the claim in Genesis that the Egyptians hated shepherds makes no sense on its own. In light of Manetho's hate for the Hyksos and his claim that they were shepherds, Genesis suddenly makes sense as a veiled reference to the Hyksos, but only if the author was familiar with Manetho or a very similar source that incorrectly equated the Hyksos with shepherds. Now, Manetho makes a big deal about the Hyksos capital at Avaris and says the Hyksos shepherds built a great wall around the region. It turns out the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived according to Genesis and Exodus, was probably the region around Avaris. Gamirkin points out that on their way out of Egypt, the Israelites passed by the wilderness of Shur.
Oh, we got another super duper. Pagan Prince, thank you so much for the super chat. Does one require the money? Don't let the vestibules divine comedy drag you down. Ask the questions, make something good and fair. Thank you so much, Pagan Prince. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, look, everyone, I think, everyone needs to be able to survive, right? But yeah, I had a blast making this documentary, Pagan. It was really a lot of fun, and we've got several videos like this. There's another one I did on Moses, like 4 hours long, and it goes into so many more weeds that this one doesn't focus on. And that one did really well. I think it's got close to 1 million views on it. So it's a couple years old, and maybe we'll do a hangout show where we go through that one, because I cover some of Bruce Loudon's work, which I highlighted earlier in this video. He parallels, there's a story in the Odyssey, for those who don't know, where they get shipwrecked on a island, and the sun god Apollo's cattle are there, and they're told to swear that they will not eat it. They won't eat the cattle. They mess up. They F around and find out. And Odysseus goes off and prays on a mountain for 30 days, and he's not even near his men. And they're all starving. He comes back. They do what they should not have done. And guess what? Apollo's pissed. And of course, gets vengeance on every one of them that participated in this. And I find that we'll have to get into it because there's so much thematic stuff. We may not have time today, but maybe in a future episode, I could start my live stream sooner and we can actually continue going further into this. But again, Pagan, thank you so much. I try to be fair. That's the point. No. To your comment, fair for the pagans too. Because here's the deal. What you'll notice I do a lot with my channel is I try to level the playing field. I try to point out, like, we have been told one story, and it's unfortunate that the Western world isn't predominantly educated on many of these stories. We're not chewing on all these different stories like we should be. Some people know about the Odyssey, cool, and that's good. They should know more about that. The Odyssey, Iliad, things like that through popular film. But it's like, if we really knew Dionysus, if we knew more about Orpheus, if we knew more about spread your wings, go further, Egyptian mythology, if we knew more about Canaanite mythology and Hittite mythology and Mesopotamian and the Greek pantheon and got into the Vedic, I mean, you name it, right? We can go all the way into like Germanic, ancient, Nordic, etc. Like, the more we learn about all of this, I think we have a big human puzzle that we can see we're all human, and different cultures did approach the world differently and had different customs and beliefs and stories, but there's a lot of overlap. And I think it lowers one supreme story, a supremacist story that is the one and only, and it knocks it down and says, hey, humans being humans, baby. Humans being humans. And that's what I enjoy. And if you find something good in that, cool. Don't go around harming people, trying to weaponize it and hit people over the head. That's what I'm trying to help people, is say, hey, cherish it. You find something useful there. You see some ugly stuff there too. Yeah, we do too. You know what I mean? That goes for all cultures. And that's my goal, to be fair. So Pagan, love you. Thank you so much. Julian the Apostate. Absolutely. Oh, Julius the Apostle? Oh, I thought you meant Julian the Apostate. Maybe you do mean that. That's the first thing that came to my mind, was Julian the Apostate. I wish the emperor lived longer. Who knows what would have happened with Christianity and paganism at the time. Would have been interesting to see. Okay, continuing the movie. Interrupt with any super chats, comments, questions, whatever. Let's have some fun. And everybody get your popcorn or whatever you do. Let's enjoy.
Which means wall in Hebrew. Manetho continues that Pharaoh Thutmosis besieged Avaris and expelled the Hyksos. He writes, no fewer than 240,000 entire households with their possessions left Egypt and traversed the desert to Syria. There, terrified by the might of the Assyrians, they, the Hyksos, built a city in the country now called Judea, capable of accommodating their vast company, and gave it the name of Jerusalem. This large number of Hyksos households and its specificity bring to mind the 600,000 Israelites that leave Egypt in the Exodus story. It's important to be clear here. The Israelites were not the Hyksos, and the timeline of the Hyksos dynasty is incompatible with the biblical chronology of the Israelite sojourn in Egypt. Moreover, Manetho is not saying the Hyksos were Jews. Rather, he is saying that Judea and the city of Jerusalem were founded by the Hyksos. This story has a lot in common with Hecataeus' story, that Jerusalem was founded by Egyptians. Gamirkan suggests that Manetho, an Egyptian priest, was correcting Hecataeus. No, says Manetho, the Jews are not Egyptians. They descend from foreigners who were driven out of Egypt. To summarize Manetho's first story about the Hyksos, he describes the century of Hyksos rule in terms influenced by the more recent Persian conquest of Egypt. He mistakenly says their name meant shepherd kings, and says that when they were expelled from Egypt, they settled in Judea and founded Jerusalem. This is relevant to the emerging Moses tradition for two reasons. One, there are numerous thematic parallels in Genesis and Exodus that are hard to explain unless the Pentateuch authors use Manetho as a source. And 2, Manetho seems to be correcting the legend told by Hecataeus about who founded Jerusalem. Hecataeus says it was Egyptians led by Moses, but Manetho, writing a few decades later, says it was the Hyksos who were foreign shepherds. It's important to emphasize that Manetho shows no knowledge of any Jewish tradition or scriptures in this story. The second story told by Manetho and preserved by Josephus is even more intriguing. This one takes place, according to Manetho's chronology, some 500 years later, and it concerns an Egyptian king named Amenophis. As Manetho's story goes, King Amenophis of Egypt wants to have a vision of the gods. His seer tells him he will see the gods if he purges Egypt of lepers and other polluted people. Amenophis does as he is told, sending 80,000 disabled people and lepers to work in the stone quarries east of the Nile. However, the seer also warns that these polluted men will join forces with an enemy and become the masters of Egypt for 13 years. Having put that warning in writing, the seer kills himself. After some time, King Amenophis allows the polluted men to inhabit the abandoned city of Avaris, a city dedicated to the god Seth Typhon since the time of the original Hyksos. Once established in Avaris, those men appoint a leprous priest from Heliopolis named Osarsiph to be their leader. Under Osarsiph, they abandon the traditional Egyptian gods and prepare for war against King Amenophis. Let's stop here and point out.
Oh, snap, snap, snap. Thank you for that super chat. Jim Maula, forgive me if I butchered the last part, but Jim, I know Jim, thank you for that super chat. Were there any truly original myths or religious stories around this time, 300 BC? Or are they all combinations of earlier story components? I want to answer this, and we'll get back to the documentary. Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. I want to say this, and this is going to sound funny. It's going to sound like a cop-out. Every myth is original, and every myth is recycled. It's like the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. Because truthfully, every story is a bit different. Usually they are changing details, not even the same stories that are being told by the same people. So you have a myth of the death or the birth. Let's talk about the birth of Horus. Okay. Horus is birthed by Isis searching for Osiris's body. She finds every piece except for his phallus, his, you know what. She creates one and magically through magical power incantation, brings him back to life in a manner that she can impregnate herself through him, and she births Horus. So it's a sexual insemination through obviously miraculous means, but yet it's still, somehow physical. There's a sexual unit there. When you go and read Herodotus, you hear about this character named Epaphus. You also hear about this character named Io. Io and Isis become one and the same. It's the Greek name of a goddess that is equivalent to Isis. You get several sources, and I've got a video coming out. Stay tuned. I'm going to cover this in great depth because there's a virgin birth story for Epaphus, a virgin cow, female cow, that is birthed in two different ways in two different stories. It's the same character. It's Isis. But it's Zeus impregnating Isis through light from heaven in one case, and another is just by touching with the hand. Epaphus means to touch. So the name Epaphus, which is Isis's son, means to touch. Notice there's 3 different kinds of birth stories for the same characters. And so it depends on what you mean by original myths. If you mean like lock, stock, and barrel, they're completely isolated, I don't think there's any myths in the world that do not recycle and continue to retell stories that are passed down to them by hearing them through something, reading them through something. I don't know of any original myths that I can think of off the top of my head. That is not to say that maybe there's the awareness of other stories that someone created a story, but even that, how original is it when you're inspired by already known storytelling? And that's why I have a very hard problem when you're reading people who say, oh, when we get to Jesus, all bets are off. We're dealing with bona fide history. This one happened. C.S. Lewis. That one's very difficult for me to wrap my head around because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we would be able to recognize the stock birth narrative that we see for thousands of years, from heroic figures from Egypt to Mesopotamia to Greece, you name it, and then get to this one and go, no, but this one happened. And then guess what? After Jesus in the Gospels, birth narratives for Caesars and all sorts of stuff continue. Apollonius Tyana continue. So, I mean, use the birth narrative for resurrection, ascension to heaven, walking on water, whatever you want to say. And I think we're dealing with a trope, a well-known fictional trope that gets passed on. Sorry I brought it to Jesus because that wasn't the point of the super chat. But again, I could say they're all original because they're all doing something unique and different, and the stories aren't identical. But they're also, different, the same. They're still recycling a lot of these things. And I'm not saying that it's all one story and everybody's telling the same story. There is a lot of connecting going on in the Hellenistic period, though, where Greeks are interpreting Egyptian stories with the Greek lens. And I think they call this interpretatio Graecae, if I'm not mistaken. But like there is some syncretism going on around this period. And how far back does that go? Nisa Mamzalog thinks that Dionysus and Yahweh go back to the Aegean in the Bronze Age. So that's a whole nother video. We'll do a movie night like this on the Origins of Yahweh documentary that I produced. It's almost 2 hours long. It's twice the length of this one, I think. But I put my everything into making that video. Thank you, Jim, for the super chat. I hope that makes sense because I'm trying to keep it real. I don't think there's any isolated myth that's just invented. Everybody's recycling and passing along, and they call that social mimesis. Rene Girard actually talks about this in great depth. So if you're looking for understanding how that works better, Rene Girard. He's someone really well known for that idea. All right, continuing the documentary. Here we go. Feel free to interrupt with super chats.
Now, this story is fictional. However, according to Gamirkan, it served an important political purpose: to criticize the revival of the Seth cult under the Ramesside kings. Seth, the god of the desert, was an Egyptian deity who became equated with the Syrian storm god Hadad during the reign of the Hyksos. The cult of Seth continued to flourish in Avaris even after the expulsion of the Hyksos. But in Manetho's time, it was highly demonized for its association with foreign invaders. Manetho's goal was to show that the cult had been founded by polluted priests from the beginning. Propaganda that links evil foreigners with the Seth Typhon cult is explicit in another Hellenistic Egyptian text called the Oracle of the Potter. Written around the time of Manetho, it purports to be an ancient prophecy given to Amenophis. It predicts a time of drought, a darkening of the sun, and other hardships that will only end when foreigners and their religion are expunged from Egypt. It also predicts that when that time comes, Alexandria, the city of foreigners, will be abandoned. Continuing Manetho's story, the rebels send an embassy to Jerusalem, inviting the Hyksos shepherds to come fight against Egypt. Some 200,000 shepherds answer the call and come to Avaris, and King Amenophis remembers the seer's warning. He gathers an army to confront the rebels, but then changes his mind and retreats to Ethiopia.
Oh, snap. Another super chats. 2, thank you so much. Enduring motifs, if we stick to the data, keep speculation constrained, the Exodus narrative likely preserves a memory of the Hyksos, whether as direct history or later reshaped cultural memory. I tend to agree. I mean, when was it the last time that you had Semitic peoples ruling in Egypt? Remember, Joseph is a ruling figure, and I don't think the Exodus begins with Moses. I think you have to see continuity with the Joseph narrative, and that leads down into the Exodus with Moses, right? You have ruling figures. Joseph was a right hand of Pharaoh, right? So he's a significant Semitic figure. And then you end up having this large Exodus motif, this idea that they're from Syria, the same region and territory that, you know, at one point was ruled by Egypt, and might make sense why they came down and were able to rule, that they were under the same jurisdiction. What I would say is this, that I brought a book up earlier, Enduring Motifs, that is by Philip Wagenbaum. He highlights how there are Greco-Roman Egyptian romance novels that talk with the same motif of trying to go out into the desert and stuff. So I think this would be what a consensus of scholarship would argue. And I think that there's good reasons for every bit of that. I would just add that you have these novels, these romance novels, again, that highlight this idea of the brother who comes to the woman that is there under the Pharaoh's control, says, hey, our father died, but it's really the lover that's coming. Hey, we need to go do this burial ritual or the gods are going to be displeased. We just need to go out in the wilderness, and they're trying to flee to get away from the Pharaoh. And it's the same kind of journey. I think Philip Wagenbaum points out the same amount of days that they sojourned to end up setting up the tabernacle and stuff. I might be mistaken about that. It's been a while since I read his book, but even with that, you'd still have a potential cultural memory that goes behind it, right? So, and the fact that we end up having Manetho, like we're talking about in the documentary right now, Manetho's recollecting this whole Seth Typhon that was worshipped by the Hyksos. They're Semitic peoples. They're from the same territory. And even later in the Hellenistic period, you do get a lot of people equating Yahweh with Seth, right? So there's good reason to think they at least assume this memory. In the Hellenistic period, we know that they were. Is the Exodus motif crafted based on that? Probably, or at least in some way reflects it. Yes. Well said. And I agree. Thank you so much. Sorry for the long, elaborate answer there. And then Leb, thank you for the super chat. Would you consider the book of Job a Gnostic text? I don't know. I've never thought about thinking about the book of Job as a Gnostic text. I never really thought about that. I don't know. I never really thought about it. I'd have to try to wrap my head around thinking of it that way. I think it's a strange book. You have the devil, Satan, really. Let me use the technical terms, right? Because there's no devil. Satan, who is this adversary, he's doing the will of God, and he's coming to God trying to get him in trouble, right? Trying to search and test people. He's testing them. God wants him to do what he's doing. Tells him what he can and cannot do. You can touch him, but you can't kill him. I mean, like, God's pulling the strings here. I could see a Gnostic reading this text and saying, hell nah, that's not a good God. That's not a loving God, right? I could see humans today, not just Gnostics. I could see a human today reading that. And I struggled with this when I was a believer. I was like, hold on, what? What's going on? It's like, It's like we're all just pawns in this big game where, like, I tried to read it like when I was a Christian, I used to read it like Satan and him are struggling and fighting over humans. But then I read it as I was starting to, get more exegetical in my Christian years and realized, hold on, I started to become a Calvinist and whatnot. I was like, no. Everything's God doing. It's like I missed the whole how bad this looks, when you're reading it. But I've never thought, let me look at it through a Gnostic lens. And I think if we do, depending on the Gnostic you're reading, it could make a lot of sense why they would think this God is not so loving. They think this is not good. I don't know. Thank you, Leb. Good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I really appreciate you. All right, we're getting back to the documentary. Let's enjoy and super chat questions, comments, whatever. Interrupt as you will. Here we go.
This purely fictional story is an allegory for King Nectanebos II, who similarly fled to Ethiopia when Artaxerxes III invaded. According to Manetho, these rebels and their Hyksos allies set fire to the cities of Egypt, pillaged the temples, and mutilated the statues of the gods. Manetho then, as an aside, says that according to Egyptian gossip about the Jews, this priest, Osiris, was the same person as Moses. He also says there is much more Egyptian gossip about the Jews that he will not discuss. We can assume it was not good gossip. To summarize, Manetho's second story is about the return of the Hyksos from Jerusalem to Egypt, where they joined forces with leprous priests to pillage Egypt and its temples. It is not a historical event, but an allegorical tale about the reign of terror under Artaxerxes III and the impious foreign cult of Seth Typhon. However, by Manetho's time, this backlash against foreigners might have included the Jews, and some Egyptians were spreading gossip that equated Moses with Osiris, the priest from Heliopolis. Manetho himself does not appear to know anything about Moses or Judea beyond what could be found in Hecataeus' earlier account.
Oh, we got another super in the house. Enduring Motifs, thank you so much. I really appreciate the super chat, my friend. Yes, and I think they come from the northern Levant, Hyksos. Scholars like Aaron A. Burke, Mary Ellen Buck, and Nissam Amzalog point to strong Amorite cultural ties in Syria. You drop some big names there. I can't argue with them. In fact, I'm in direct conversation all the time with Nissam. He's got a heavy accent, but brilliant, brilliant people. I think you're onto something here. And I like how I like Nissam Amzalog's work. I haven't read Aaron A. Burke or Mary Ellen Buck's work on this, but Nissam I have. And I think that you're definitely touching on something that is a very important aspect to how the formation of these narratives end up eventually taking place within the tradition of people in the region. So I think we have this idea that, if they're in Judea, they're so separated from people in the Syrian region. And I think that's just a false dichotomy. That doesn't mean that they are the same identical people either, though. But I think you're right. The Hyksos from the northern Levant, and this whole idea needs to be explored more by a popular audience of people. I mean, you have scholars talk about this stuff all the time, but how many people on the internet, on YouTube, really know about this material? This needs to be known. So hopefully at some point I could do something like an exclusive documentary that talks about the Hyksos in great depth, like the history of them and how their memory is obviously immortalized in tales like the Exodus, but really not from like a Bible standpoint, like I'm doing today with Moses, more like these people had their own powerful stories, their own powerful culture, and later it gets adopted as a memory into stuff we call the Bible. That's the angle I'd like to paint and portray it in. That's what critical scholarship helps us do. All right, continuing. Thank you again, Enduring Motifs.
In his daring 2006 book, Gamirkan made the proposal that the biblical Exodus story was created as a response to slander about the Jews that was circulating in the 3rd century BCE. According to this slander, the Jews were descendants of the hated Hyksos, and their leader Moses had been a renegade priest from Heliopolis. In essence, the Exodus story turns the tables, making the Jews the victims rather than the oppressors. It acknowledges the Hyksos link by placing the Jews around Avaris and blaming the Egyptians for their hatred of shepherds. It casts the Jews in the role of slaves that is filled by the polluted people in Manetho. And it presents the Jews as pious followers of Yahweh rather than Seth Typhon. Earlier layers of the biblical story even say that the Jews were expelled from Egypt, while later layers change this expulsion to an escape that the Pharaoh was opposed to. There are other parallels with the Exodus story that must also be noted. The Pentateuch has 2 strange references to leprosy. One is in Exodus 4, where Moses is able to turn his hand leprous and heal it as a sign to Pharaoh. The other is the story of Miriam being briefly stricken with leprosy as God's punishment for rebellion in Numbers 12. Both stories are plausibly intended to subvert the charge that all the Jews of Egypt had been lepers. Renowned Old Testament scholar Thomas Romer agrees with this interpretation, and he thinks Manetho's story is reflected in Deuteronomy 7:15 as well. All the dread diseases from Egypt that you experienced, Yahweh will not inflict on you. Romer says the biblical redactor opposes to the tradition of the lepers known by Manetho the affirmation that Moses' leprosy was only momentary. It happened in the context of a transfer of divine powers to him. Another scholar, J. Ruckel, has argued that the statement by the Pharaoh in Exodus 1:10 is based on the Manetho tradition. In this verse, the Pharaoh declares, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us, and get them up out of the land." The idea that Israel might join forces with Egypt's enemies is a blind motif that is abandoned in the rest of the Exodus story. However, it is a close parallel to the part of Manetho's story in which the seer predicts that the polluted priests will join forces with Egypt's enemies. Lastly, Philip R. Davies has noted that the obscure term Hasafsuf, which seems to refer to an entity traveling with the Israelites in Numbers 11:4, could be related to the name Osarsif from the Manetho tradition. So the idea that parts of the Exodus story are dependent on the Hyksos tradition promoted by Manetho in the early 3rd century is already mainstream scholarship. Gamirkin simply goes a bit further in proposing that the main framework of the Exodus story is post-Manetho. Davies agrees that the conventional explanation that Hecataeus and Manetho knew a garbled version of the Jewish Exodus story is not necessarily correct. It remains possible that the narratives of Hecataeus and Manetho are a garbled form of the Judean story of an Exodus, in which the plagues, the name of Moses, and the departure of a group of people towards Judah have been transformed. But it is equally possible that the opposite is true, and that the story of the plagues and the transformation of an expulsion into a miraculous escape is a Judean revision of an older Egyptian story known to Hecataeus and Manetho. Sometime after 250 BCE, a Jewish writer named Artapanis, who most likely resided in Alexandria, Egypt, wrote a book called Concerning the Jews. This book has not survived, but summaries by the Greek scholar Alexander Polyhistor were preserved by some church fathers. Artapanis relates several traditions about Moses that are not found in the Pentateuch. A variant of these traditions is also known to Josephus, who does not cite Artapanis. In the surviving fragments of Artapanis' story, Moses was adopted by an Egyptian woman named Meris, who was betrothed to an Egyptian ruler named Chenephrus. Moses grows up to be a brilliant inventor and philosopher. He also divides Egypt into 36 departments and sets aside land for the priests. Chenephrus grows jealous of the admiration that the Egyptians have for Moses, so he sends Moses with an army of farmers to fight the Ethiopians who are threatening Egypt, hoping that Moses will die in the process. En route to the Ethiopians, Moses founds the city of Hermopolis and consecrates the ibis there. Then Moses fights the Ethiopians for 10 years, but eventually befriends them and teaches them circumcision. Later, Chenephrus hires an assassin to kill Moses while he is attending the burial of his adopted mother. Moses learns of the plot and buries her in secret at a city that he names Meroe. After this, Moses flees to Arabia, where he lives with the chieftain Raguel and marries Raguel's daughter. Josephus's version contains the same general narrative and elements, but the details are somewhat different. Moses' mother is named Thermuthis, and Moses is put in charge of Pharaoh's regular army, not farmers. In this version, Moses does not found Hermopolis. However, he cleverly uses ibises to fend off dangerous flying serpents that block the way to the Ethiopian army. By traveling over land with these ibises, he is able to take the Ethiopians by surprise. He defeats their army and drives them back to their stronghold, a city called Meroe. As Moses nears the walls of the city, the Ethiopian king's daughter, named Tharbis, sees Moses and falls in love with him. He agrees to marry her as long as she hands the city over to him. Although Artapanis is assumed to have known the Pentateuch in its Greek translation, the Septuagint, his story diverges greatly from it. In his understanding, the Jews are the kin of Abraham who remain in Egypt when Abraham returns to Syria. And Moses comes along just one generation later. Only after Moses' campaign in Ethiopia does the king of Egypt begin to persecute the Jews. After this, Artapanis' story of Moses begins to resemble the biblical story of the Exodus more closely, albeit with major omissions. There is no death of the firstborn, for example. Instead, the king releases the Jews after a plague of hail and earthquakes that destroys all the Egyptian houses and temples. Was Artapanis actually familiar with the Pentateuch, or does his knowledge reflect an earlier incomplete form of those stories? According to Thomas Romer, the tradition of Moses as a conqueror is borrowed from the legend of Sesostris, a mythical king of Egypt, who was written about by Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, and Strabo. According to legend, Sesostris was a brilliant leader who organized Egypt into departments. He was also a great strategist and waged war against Ethiopia, and was accompanied by his wife on his return. Herodotus also mentions a cult dedicated to the ibis because of their ability to repel the winged snakes of the desert. Some late elements of the Pentateuch may be based on this Moses legend. The plague of seraph serpents in Numbers 21 in particular echoes the flying serpents encountered by Moses in Ethiopia. And in both cases, it is Moses' ingenuity that saves the day. The strange mention of Moses marrying an Ethiopian woman in Numbers 12 is probably derived from the legend of Moses marrying the Ethiopian king's daughter. Including this detail in the Moses story might have been especially meaningful to the Judean diaspora living in Elephantine, near the Ethiopian frontier during the Hellenistic era.
Hey, real quick, we're about to get to the birth of Moses, but I figure I would show everybody this right here. This image that you see is a winged serpent. It is a seraphim. It is literally a sheet of gold collar depicting the winged serpent goddess Wadjet, found in King Tutankhamun's tomb, New Kingdom. But this is what a seraphim, a winged serpent being, would represent. This, by the way, is an 18th dynasty Egypt. So if you're looking for dates, 1332 to 1323 BCE. This is a really interesting example of what you imagine when the Bible talks about seraphim. You have these flying, biting, venomous serpents, right? This is the imagery you would get in the ancient Near East and, of course, in Egypt. So I figured I'd show everybody that. All right, continuing.
A fairy tale-like story about Moses' birth is told in Exodus 2. Here is a summary. An unnamed Levite man marries a Levite woman who gives birth to a baby boy. She hides him for 3 months, then puts him in a reed basket coated with bitumen and pitch, and she places it among the reeds of the river bank. The boy's sister, also unnamed, watches at a distance. When the Pharaoh's daughter comes to bathe, she sees the basket and sends her maid to bring it. They discover the child, which the princess realizes must be Hebrew. The baby's sister offers to go fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. When the princess agrees, she brings the child's mother. The princess names the child Moses because he was drawn out of the water. The legendary birth story of Moses has many, many parallels in ancient literature. The most widely cited parallel is the birth legend of Sargon of Akkad, known from Neo-Assyrian tablets. My mother was a high priestess. My father I knew not. My high priestess mother conceived me. In secret she bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she sealed my lid. She cast me into the river, which rose over me. The river bore me up and carried me to Aki, the drawer of water. Aki, the drawer of water, took me as his son and reared me. Aki, the drawer of water, appointed me as his gardener. While I was a gardener, Ishtar granted me her love, and for 4 and it breaks up years, I exercised kingship. It is hard to deny the similarities with the reed basket coated with bitumen and the river in particular, and this legend was probably well known throughout antiquity. However, there are other details in the Moses legend that appear in Hellenistic myth. One such myth is the birth of Heracles. In that story, Alcmene is impregnated by Zeus and gives birth to Heracles. But she fears the wrath of Hera, Zeus's wife, so she abandons Heracles in a field. Athene, Heracles' sister, rescues him and takes him to Hera, who agrees to nurse the child without knowing who who the child actually is. However, the child sucks so strongly during nursing that he hurts Hera. So Athena takes the child back to his mother, Alcmene, to nurse him. Another interesting parallel, identified by Dr. Bruce Loudon, a specialist in Greek myth, comes from Ion, a Greek play by Euripides that was written between 414 and 412 BCE. In that tale, the woman Creusa gives birth to a boy after being raped by Apollo. To conceal his birth, she abandons him in a wicker cradle with 2 snakes as guardians. Hermes retrieves the infant and his cradle and places them on the steps of the Oracle of Delphi, where a priestess discovers the baby and decides to raise him. The boy grows up to be Ion, progenitor of the Ionians, and he is even named on the basis of a pun, much like Moses. This story motif was widespread in Hellenistic times. Classicist Dr. Iona Karamanou remarks in a recent book, "The exposure of a hero as a baby."
Oh, snap. We got another one. Thank you again. Wade in the house with a super chat. Thank you so much, Wade. Wade Rogers. An image you showed of Moses and snake around a pole is a riff off the healing rod of Asclepius, Numbers 21, 4-9. People look at pole and are healed. I 100% agree. The healing rod of Asclepius used, there's overlap, of course, with deities that we'd find in Egypt as well that have this idea. Also, you know, Wade, someone, did I pop it up or did I just read it on the side? I thought I popped it up. Someone mentioned earlier that this is not a seraphim, right? It's a winged serpent, okay? You might say, oh, well, it's not technically the 6 wings, someone said. This image is 6 wings. This is an Aramaean inscription. So we're talking 10th century BCE, very old Aramaean inscription of a seraphim, 6 wings. But the idea, the concept of a winged venomous serpent that has fiery breath and whatnot, that is a well-known ancient Near Eastern motif that you're finding in the Moses tradition, which is outside the Bible that you see going down. Isn't it interesting that Josephus is telling a version of this story that is not the Exodus motif story? It's like a whole nother Moses tradition. But yeah, Wade, you're right that the Asclepius healing rod absolutely has its parallels with the Moses story and in Egyptian mythology with that of Asclepius that we find in the Greek world. So there's a lot going on with these healer gods that you can find. Eshmun as well with the Phoenicians, this oil type of anointed figure, Eshmun, who also does healings, the whole nine, similar to what we find with Moses. Very powerful. Thank you so much for that observation. I agree. I agree with you. Let me continue here.
Baby, his miraculous survival and eventual restoration to his proper status constitute a common tale pattern found with a degree of variation in a wide range of Greek and non-Greek sources.
Oh, another super duper. Wing of Shu. Thank you, Wing of Shu. You said, how different culture-wise was the old, middle, and new kingdom of Egypt, and what was shared even subconsciously, and what was changed, forgotten? Honestly, Wing, I'm not an Egyptologist. I can't answer this question. I know there's continuity, no matter what. There's continuity going on. But to argue what changed under the old, middle, and new kingdom of Egypt, I would honestly need to talk to my Egyptologist friends and give them a call and say, hey, I had on recently Darlene Colleen? Maybe I'm saying her name wrong. Carlene Darnell, who's like a well-known Egyptologist. She's been on all the shows, History Channel, the whole nine. And then, of course, Cooney, who I have courses with as well. I haven't studied the Egyptian world, old, middle, and new kingdom, like in depth at all. So I really don't want to give you a bad answer here. We could look it up though, just to find out and see what we can see. Let's do that. So I'm going to ask, just to get a general outline here on ChatGPT, I'm going to say, what do Egyptologists typically say to this answer? And by the way, take this with a grain of salt, because you want primary sources. You want primary sources. You want scholarly sources to fact check what ChatGPT might be saying here. This might be right. This might be wrong. I have it in, what version is this? Thinking Configure. It's the latest model. So let's see what it comes up with. I'll answer that question in just a second. Then we'll continue the documentary. I really appreciate the question, though, because I'm curious. You got me wondering, what did they change from the old, middle to new? And I like knowing these answers. In fact, my wife was getting a root canal today, and I was like, I wonder, a lot of people died back in those times because they didn't have dentistry. And the guy knew a little history. The dentist office that we went to here in Orlando, Florida, he said, the ancient Egyptians used to do root canals too. And I said, really? And they had like sharp filing stones, and they would file down in there, and then they would stuff it with bird poop. I kid you not, bird poop. And I was like, bird poop? He said, yeah, as long as they cleaned the infected area real well, their survival chances were higher. So you could stuff it with dirt, as long as you're not getting like some overwhelming bacteria that causes the infection to get worse. They stuffed it with bird poop. I don't know. This is what ChatGPT came up with. Egyptologists would usually answer, ancient Egypt was not one frozen culture for 3,000 years, but it was also not three totally different civilizations. The Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms are better understood as major phases of one long cultural tradition with deep continuity plus major reinterpretation. And so ultimately, the Old Kingdom was the age of divine kingship as its most concentrated. The king was the cosmic center, pyramid building, solar theology, royal afterlife, and state-organized labor dominate the picture. The Met notes that many ideas that shaped later pharaonic Egypt took recognizable form in the Old Kingdom. Middle Kingdom was not a restart from zero. Egyptologists often describe it as a period of revival and reimagining after fragmentation. Older kingdom principles of kingship, society, religion, and afterlife belief were reused but reshaped. The king becomes more humanly burdened. Literature flourishes. Osiris becomes more central for wider groups, and non-royal people increasingly participate in afterlife hopes, once most closely associated with kings. The Met explicitly says Middle Kingdom culture reimagined principles first set out in earlier Egyptian civilization. And then it says New Kingdom Egypt is New Kingdom Egypt is Egypt as empire. It is more militarized, international, wealthy, and temple-centered. Pharaoh's campaign into Nubia and the Levant, Umun-Ra rises to enormous prominence, especially through Thebes and Karnak. Monumental temples, royal propaganda, and imperial theology become central. The Met describes the New Kingdom as a long period of political stability and prosperity, famous for monumental architecture, divine kingship, and elite non-royal artistic production. Interesting. So what was shared even subconsciously? The shared deep grammar was ma'at, the idea that the world must be kept in cosmic, moral, political, and ritual order. Divine kingship, even when the image of the king changed, the office remained sacred. The Nile rhythm, inundation, fertility, death, renewal, and cyclical time. Temple ritual, feeding, clothing, honoring, and maintaining the gods. Afterlife concern, tombs, offerings, names, memory, judgment, resurrection, and joining the gods. Mythic recycling, old symbols never really died. They were recombined. Horus, Osiris, Ra, Ptah, Hathor, Isis, Seth, Amun, and others could shift roles without disappearing. So there's a lot more, but I think I've answered a lot of your question there. I just want to make sure that you got that. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Means a lot. Did I miss anything here, or was that it? I don't want to leave anybody hanging. Oh no, we got one more here. Thank you. Sitorni. Thank you for the super chat. What do you think about child sacrifice in ancient Israel? I think it's horrific. I think humans thought that, the most valuable thing in life needed to be given to the gods and it would appease them somehow. So they were giving something very important to the gods, believing they would get something in return. And I say gods plural because we're dealing with a polytheistic society. But this idea of if human sacrifice, we still have fossils of that within the Bible. As far as archaeological evidence that they did it, I don't know if there's a lot. There might be some evidence suggesting this happened. Some scholars even argue that there were human sacrifice, not just infant sacrifice, but human sacrifice that we find. We get this with the reforms that take place later in the history of things, when they're now trying to break away from the various different Yahwistic temples and cults around the territory and trying to make one location in Jerusalem. That, is often a reform that has them burning priests and grinding their bones and everything into a sacrifice on the altars. It's pretty wild. But if you're asking me what I think about it, I think they're horrific. I think humans really believed that somehow superstitiously that by giving your offspring, you're giving one of the highest things you can give to the gods and trying to somehow get more fertility, get more agricultural wealth that year, more luck, if you could call it, through doing such a thing. And there is some scholarship that's been worked on that shows that they would usually lose a child. Like, it wasn't uncommon for a wife to lose her firstborn. So maybe they thought in some way it wasn't too much of a sacrifice, since half the kids that were birthed would die, or more than half would die. I don't know. I can't go back and obviously read their minds, but I do think it's horrific to look back and see what we've done, and we see this is like a common motif that's happening in the Americas, separated from what was already happening here in the Near East. And I just think the story of Abraham is evidence that there was this practice, and they're trying to say, no more human sacrifices. They're trying to get away from it. But then you end up having a human sacrifice with Jesus, right? So all sorts of interesting things. Thank you so much. I appreciate the super chat, but again, I would go look up the scholars who actually highlight what's going on in the biblical tradition. There are hints of it. When they had a child, they're supposed to give you could say an atonement fee. Instead of killing the child, they pay a fee on behalf of that child. That's a powerful image to have in mind, that for the firstborn son, they are now, instead of killing them, having to pay a fee. So they're shifting away from an older thing that seems to imply they were doing some kind of child sacrifice. And that goes for the surrounding territories as well. Many people have noted that there seems to be, to the north of them, in Syria, Phoenician territory, you would also see infant sacrifice likely happening there as well. They found, remains of children that give this idea that humans were doing that. Pretty ugly stuff, but you find it almost everywhere. At least the ideas and the stories are there. As far as the archaeological evidence of them practicing it in all places, that's not necessarily the case, but people know about it. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the super chat. Hope that makes sense. Sitorni, making sure that I see your, I saw that. Okay. I hope that answers your question. I didn't know if you had a follow-up. So thank you, everybody. Let's get back to the documentary. We're almost through with the documentary, so bear with us here.
This pattern is represented, for instance, in the well-known tales of Jason, Cyrus, Erechthonius, Romulus, and Remus, as well as the story of Oedipus, Ion, Telephus, Alexandros, Hippothyon, Amphion and Zethus, Neleus and Peleus, Aeolus and Boeotus. Holly, in particular, associated the seclusion and ordeal in the floating chest with rites of consecration of the young hero and his mother. Their miraculous rescue seems to demonstrate the child's divine election and predestination, as well as his mother's innocence. It's also interesting that Moses' sister is not named in Exodus 2. As Prop observes in his highly regarded commentary on Exodus, Miriam, as the sister of Moses, developed as a separate tradition. Miriam is Moses' kinswoman in the E source and his sibling in the P source, but she is non-existent in the J source. Moses' birth story with his unnamed parents and guardian sister seems to be an unconnected legend inspired by the multitude of Greek hero exposure myths that were around during the Hellenistic era.
All right, Moses in Jerusalem, real quick here, because we had our super chat ask the question about the sacrifice. I want to read you what a few scholars have to say about this, and you can get this on the Wikipedia page pertaining to infant sacrifice. And this is, I've read Francesca Stavrakopoulou talk about this, but there's other scholars. So according to scholars such as Otto Einsfeld, Paul G. Mosca, and Susan Ackerman, Moloch was not a name for a god, but instead a word for a particular form of child sacrifice practiced in Israel and Judah, which was not abandoned until the reforms of Josiah. So they didn't abandon this till the reforms of Josiah, according to these scholars. And the Tanakh mentions are made in books like Kings, Leviticus, and Jeremiah of children being given to the Molech. According to Patrick D. Miller, these child sacrifice traditions were not originally part of the Yahwism, but were instead foreign impulse. Francesca Stavrakopoulou contradicts this, asserting that sacrifices were native to Israel and part of the royal line's attempts to perpetuate itself. Or perpetuate. Hold on. Let me make sure I got this right. Perpetuate. Yeah, perpetuate. Exodus 22, 28 through 29 states, "The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me," potentially a demand by Yahweh that the firstborn children of the Israelites must be sacrificed to him. However, Jacob Milgram argues that Yahweh forbids human sacrifice and that in Exodus 22, 28 through 29, as in the Day of Atonement, Yahweh instituted substitutionary animal sacrifices for human sin and the redemption of the firstborn in Israelite families. So there's a debate that goes on, but I know everyone knows the binding of Isaac. Ban in Leviticus, they've got that there. Numbers 31, that's a big one. And you could even go to Jephthah, right? You can Jephthah's daughter, horrific stuff that you get implied in the book of Judges. So there's a lot there. But in Phoenicia and Carthage, that's what I'm talking about, where they lots of evidence suggesting human sacrifice. All right, continuing.
Let's circle back to the early Hellenistic tradition that Moses was the founder of Jerusalem. This tradition actually survives in the Bible as well. In a paper many decades ago, G.W. Ahlstrom pointed out that Samuel's farewell speech in 1 Samuel 12, which describes all the great works of Yahweh in Israel's history, states that Moses himself brought the Israelites into their homeland. When Jacob went into Egypt and the Egyptians oppressed them, then your ancestors cried to Yahweh, and Yahweh sent Moses and Aaron, who brought forth your ancestors out of Egypt and settled them in this place. That Moses remained in the wilderness while Joshua led the Israelites into Canaan. 2, it shows no awareness of the conquest of Canaan. 3, if this tradition knew of any glorious conquest, it should have been included among Yahweh's mighty deeds. 4, it mentions no promise of the land, even though the promise to Abraham is a major part of the Pentateuch's narrative. Ahlstrom concludes then that the tradition of Moses leading the people from Egypt into the land of Israel was older than the tradition of conquest under Joshua. Ahlstrom's purpose for pointing this out is to show that the conquest narrative has no historical basis. For our purposes here, it supports the thesis that the legend of Moses, the colonizer of Judea, as recorded by Hecataeus, was the bedrock on which the later Moses traditions were built. As for Joshua, Alstrom suggests he was a local hero of one of the hill country clans that formed Israel. Only later was he associated with Moses and connected with the emerging conquest tradition. We suggest that the Joshua of 1 Chronicles 7:27, who is a 9th generation descendant of Ephraim, is the original Joshua. That Joshua has a father named Nun, just as in the Pentateuch. But Chronicles tells us that the land of Ephraim was settled by Ephraim himself. In this older tradition, Joshua never grew up in Egypt or conquered Canaan. Source criticism of the Pentateuch also supports the idea that the Jews originally envisioned Moses himself as the one who led the Israelites to Jerusalem. In a recent paper, Łukasz Niishiwowski-Spano points out that the passages written by the earlier J source do not mention.
That was a pain in the ass for me to pronounce. Like, I had to do that like 10 times to try and get that name. I'm thankful I didn't have to continue to do the whole name. I'm narrating this.
The wilderness period as a punishment from God. The key passage is Exodus 17, where Moses strikes the rock at Meribah to produce water for the complaining Israelites. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Yahweh?" But the people thirsted there for water. And the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to Yahweh, "What shall I do for this people? They are almost ready to stone me." Yahweh said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink." Moses did so. In the sight of the elders of Israel, he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested Yahweh, saying, "Is Yahweh among us or not?" This passage is later rewritten in Numbers 20, and it is there God tells Moses and Aaron they will not be allowed to enter the promised land. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Why have you brought the assembly of Yahweh into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here?" Then Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They fell on their faces, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to them. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and command the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock for them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock." So Moses took the staff from before Yahweh as he had commanded him. Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their livestock drank. But Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with Yahweh, and through which he showed himself to be holy." We are clearly dealing with the same story, and it even occurs at the same location. But the punishment of Moses staying behind has been added as a new element. The presence of Aaron is also new. In another old passage called the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, Moses and the Israelites sing. You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your own possession, the place, O Yahweh, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Yahweh, that your hands have established. This is an obvious reference to the Jerusalem temple, and it is clearly linked to Moses here. Its inclusion implies an early stage of the narrative where Moses is supposed to have led the Israelites to Jerusalem and established the temple there. Yet another passage connecting Moses with the temple is 2 Kings 18, which tells us that before Hezekiah's time, there was a bronze serpent in the temple made by Moses. It was called Nehushtan, and the Israelites worshipped it. We now associate this object with the story of the poisonous serpent sent by Yahweh in Numbers 21. But that story certainly did not exist in the 8th century BCE, nor does 2 Kings actually mention it. The most we can say for now is that in 2 Kings 18, Moses is directly linked with the temple. It is a well-established fact of biblical scholarship that the stories of Moses in the Bible do not depict literal history. These stories, like the rest of the Pentateuch, evolved and grew over time, and the final form of the Pentateuch contains numerous sources and layers that have been skillfully combined by editors. We still don't know when the final redaction of the Pentateuch was produced or how most of its stories developed. Though scholars today tend to date the development of the Pentateuch to the Persian period, a growing minority believes it was still in development during the Hellenistic period after Alexander's conquest. Thomas L. Thompson has proposed that the dates and genealogies of Genesis are organized around a 4,000-year span that starts with creation and ends with the rededication of the temple under the Maccabees in 164 BCE, which would make the final Pentateuch a Hellenistic work regardless of its sources. In his 2000 book on the origins of the Bible, he writes, "The formation of biblical narrative was a process that created the Israel we know. It had its earliest roots in the period of Assyria's domination of Palestine. But the understanding of Israel we know from tradition first arose during the late Persian or early Hellenistic period, and was not fully developed before the time of the Maccabees." Niels Peter Lemke proposes that the biblical history of Israel mostly took shape under Seleucid rule during the 3rd century BC, based on the pervasive parallels between Old Testament narratives and Greek narratives, especially those of Herodotus. In one of his books, he remarks, "During this period, we can expect an interchange between Greek and Babylonian culture, much in the way we find a blending of traditions in the Old Testament." Our intent in this documentary has been to present an alternate hypothesis about the invention of Moses and the Exodus narrative, based on the work of several like-minded scholars. Frankly, we have no way of knowing the true origins of the character Moses. The earliest traditions about him, which survive in a small number of Bible passages and in the 4th century writings of the Greek historian Hecataeus of Abdera, are that he was a lawgiver and perhaps an Egyptian who founded Jerusalem and its temple, and who divided Israel into 12 tribes. Some of these facts might have originated as speculation by Hecataeus himself, based on similar legends and philosophical ideals about statehood. A few decades later, the Egyptian priest Manetho wrote a history containing 2 propagandistic stories about the Hyksos, whom Manetho inaccurately describes as shepherd kings. His first story states that the Hyksos founded Jerusalem after being driven out of Egypt. His second story states that the Hyksos had returned many centuries later at the invitation of leprous priests and other polluted men who had been oppressed by King Amenophis. Together, the Hyksos and the polluted men, who were followers of the god Seth Typhon, had carried out a reign of terror across Egypt. This story was not based in any historical reality, but was an analogy for the invasion of Persian King Artaxerxes III and a condemnation of the wicked Seth Typhon cult, which was by that time associated with foreigners. Manetho also knew of rumors in Egypt that connected the Jewish lawgiver Moses with Osiris, the leader of the leprous priests. A few more decades later, a Jewish writer living in Alexandria named Artapanis recounted a story of Moses and the Exodus that is lacking many of the details found in the Pentateuch about Moses' birth, the plagues, and the wilderness wandering. However, it includes an episode based on the Egyptian legend of Sesostris that portrays Moses as a brilliant leader and a military commander in Ethiopia who marries an Ethiopian wife. The Jews in Alexandria were aware of the tradition of Moses as their ancient lawgiver and founder of their homeland. They were also aware of the rumors associating the Judeans with the Hyksos and the polluted priests of Seth Typhon. They pushed back against this slander with their own story about how the Hebrews, not the Hyksos, were the shepherds who had been wrongly held captive by an Egyptian pharaoh until Moses led them to their home in Judea. Over the following years, this story was refined further to include other traditions, such as the Ethiopian wife, the encounter with deadly serpents, and a fairy tale-like birth story that reflects the well-known Hellenistic motif of a male child who is abandoned at birth, raised by another woman, and eventually reclaims his rightful position as a great leader. Disproving this hypothesis should be fairly simple, if not easy. A single monument about Moses' exploits from before the 4th century would do it. A single reference to the books of Moses among the thousands of Persian-era Jewish papyri from Elephantine would also be sufficient. But we cannot find what does not exist. If Moses is indeed a Hellenistic creation, then efforts to recover earlier sources are doomed to fail. In the meantime, you can count on MythVision to keep on pursuing the mysteries of the Bible and the origins of the Abrahamic religions.
All right, everybody. What'd you think? Hope you enjoyed it. There was one of my Moses documentaries. I've got other ones as well that we get into different material. And want to hear, vote in the comments if you enjoyed that. Press 1. I want to see some ones in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to show you, while I get some of those ones ready, I'm going to show you another video. Someone asked about child sacrifice that I did a video on. We should do a video covering where it's called God and Molech. You could see the eyes here. Child sacrifice in the Bible. I go into great depth about this Molech sacrifice and child sacrifice. I bring in Francesca Stavrokopoulou. I bring in the debate of scholars so you can actually enjoy it. It's really high quality stuff. We've got some really good stuff here on MythVision that we've produced over the years. So I do hope that you will go check that out. In fact, I'll comment it in the chat so you can go watch this if you want. We can do a video on this as well. All right. So we got some ones here. Let's see them. Javi, good to see you with the 1. Razor, good to see you. I hope I said that. Razor. David, nice. Roger with the 1. Alan with a great. Thank you. Sean said with what I saw. That was awesome. Thank you. David with the 1. Mana with a 1. Spectral with a 1. Pooty Cat with a 1. T says 1. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. J. Keith, 1. Amanda, 1. Brian, 1. Zoltan, nice. Yeshua, 1. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And thanks. Yeah. Javi, thank you. Sean, thank you so much. David, thank you. Thank you. I want to show you one more thing before we go, and I don't want to dwell on it because I got to go eat dinner, and it's getting close to 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I would like to do these more often. So I want to ask you your opinion. Let's just say, because I like to do streams daily and stay connected with you. Let's just say that I'm having a hard day. I've been working all days, things like that outside, and I can't come up with a really clever topic myself to go into the weeds on. How do you feel about movie nights like this? Do you enjoy these? Like, this was pretty simple. I had a long day. I had to take my wife to the dentist. We have a lot going on. Her mother is declining in health right now. She wrote us a very heartfelt message about the struggles that she's experiencing with the pain with her stage 4 cancer getting worse. And she can tell that her body's deteriorating more. So it's been a lot trying to deal with the emotional side of these things psychologically. But then also my wife had a toothache and hasn't been able to sleep really well within the last week and all of that. So I thought, let me do a movie night. Let me hang out with you. These are easy for me. And as long as you enjoy them, I'll be happy to do them. It makes me feel motivated to be able to do videos like this if I can. How do you feel in the chat about doing these more often if I'm having a tough day where I'm not able to produce something, fresh, raw, new? Like tomorrow I have some sources to get into with Dionysus and Jesus. I'd like to open the books, show you what the scholars have said, primary sources, and do some parallels. So did you like this today? Mana says, yes, more the better. Thank you. Yeah, Spectral, it sucks, Razor says with the cry face, absolutely. Thank you for joining here. Please subscribe, hit the bell. We would like to see you come back. We're all about diving deep into this stuff. I love this stuff. Someone said, I dig it. Thank you. D1 says, this was good. Awesome. David says, movie night is cool. David says, hell yeah. These are cool, but we don't expect every day from you, brother. Of course. No, Javi. To be totally frank, I wish I didn't have to do these daily and I could take days off. YouTube is a grinding machine. And because the algorithm doesn't operate the same way it did before, I have to do this in order to provide for my family. And so I'm finding better ways that I can do it where it's not as draining and I don't have to do as much prep work. The problem I had struggling earlier before I did this live stream today, to be totally transparent, is we drove home from the dentist office. I thought, okay, I need to prep for this live stream. And I'm trying to edit this video. I might as well show you a little tease here of what I'm working on so you understand what I'm up against. I have two brilliant scholars that are Polish. And I'm in my Premiere right now. I'm just going to stretch it out here for you to see. I'm going through, and these academics have a very heavy accent. So I'm having to go through, if you can see on the left here, I'm going through the transcript and I'm having to edit because the AI that's built into Premiere Pro is getting the wrong words. And I'm having to correct the transcript so then I can put captions on the screen so you can better track what they're saying. Because they have groundbreaking scholarship that's highlighting that Ogygia in Book 5 of the Odyssey parallels the Eden narrative, and they're laying out strong genetic connections that they think that the Genesis story is borrowing from it. And so, anyway, I've got a lot of layers to cut, lots of work, truth be told. This would not be something I could do. I can't edit this and then prep hours preparing for these live streams daily. Some of these streams are easier if I can go, let's get the popcorn. Let's watch movie night. We've got some documentaries. If you haven't seen our channel and watched our documentaries, there's a lot of movie type videos that I produced. You could just go binge watch hours and hours. I probably produced, without exaggerating, I'd say 50, 60, 70 hours, somewhere in that region of documentaries, not live streams, not interviews. I've done well beyond that. I mean, we've got thousands of videos on this channel, but documentaries are polished. They take time, they take work, and we can enjoy those together. The problem is, Gerard, if I'm being completely transparent with you as a content creator, and any other content creator will tell you, if I don't address the super chats that come in at the moment, believe it or not, there's something psychological. People don't want to throw a super chat in an hour and a half before they're going to be addressed. The best way content creators can keep people wanting to be able to help support their work is when someone super chats, you address it on the spot. You don't want to leave them hanging because they're helping support your mission and what you're doing. I do understand the frustration of the interruptions during our documentaries, during the video, but truth is, that's what we're forced to do. Like, it'd be great if YouTube just paid us enough money to cover all our bills and we didn't have to worry about crowdfunding like this in order to be able to pay our, bills and take care of things. But we have to do what we have to do. And that's why I hope that you can understand and be able to understand, okay, hold on. Now that makes sense, that they need to address these topics when they're being sent in, or else people won't be interested in super chatting as often. And it's an important point. I mean, I know that when I'm super chatting other content creators, it feels good to me when I drop a super chat and that person takes the time to acknowledge me, address my comment or my question. And it doesn't help to ignore them for future super chats and people who want to support what you're doing. So I hope that makes sense to you, Gerard. Thank you for that comment. Amanda, thank you so much for the compliment. We're trying. We are doing the best we can. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It was a bit of a shock for me. Thank you. I appreciate that compliment. Yeah, I enjoy doing the interviews with scholars. Yep, we all have to dance for some type of dollar, right? So I don't mind doing it. Obviously, this is what I it's a passion of mine. I have a great opportunity here to help leave a mark in history of educating people through the internet. And the only way I can do that is if it's funded. There may be other people who come from a rich family and they have things taken care of. We don't. Keep it real. I am the sole provider in this house, and without it, you can't take care of your kids. I got 3 kids and a wonderful queen, and I do the best I can to provide for them and work very hard to do so. So thank you. Let's see, you should do what you're doing, but in future you should have people vid phone you while live. That way you will find a bigger viewership. Vid phone? I don't know what you're talking about. Vid phone? I'm not sure what you're getting at. Tom, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Let me show you one more thing before we go. I hope you go check out some of my other videos. We'll do some movie nights. I want to show you a source. And maybe you'll decide to buy it, this book, if you're a reader. If you're not, we will cover this. We've covered it in live stream before, but I didn't cover this topic. We could get into Moses more in what this scholar highlights, but I just want to show you in passing, going back to the title, Homer's Odyssey and the Near East. Bruce Loudon, he died of cancer several years back, or else I would interview the hell out of him. Just knowing me, I'd probably be hooked up with him on the cell phone. Like, that's just how I am. In fact, during this live stream, Dennis McDonald tried to give me a call. I couldn't answer. I'm going to call him back as soon as we're off in just a few minutes. But like, I would be connected with this scholar. He's the kind of scholar that I appreciate and love so much. In chapter 10, Thrinakia in Exodus 32, Odysseus and Moses, the people disobey their leader and rebel against God. So on page 222, by the way, you got to get this book. He goes through so much. 1 Samuel 28, Book of Revelation here with Catabasis stories, the combat myth, Polyphemus, that's not in the Bible, in Humbaba, Odysseus and Jonah, sea monsters and fantastic voyage. If you want to check that out, I love this one. This Odysseus and Nausicaa, Circe, Jason and Medea, Jacob and Rachel. Very, very interesting what he does in this. I've never read another scholar who does it. 222. So we go down to 222. Oh, past it. And it says, Thrinakia and Exodus, here we are, right? People disobey their leader. You're going to want to read this. If you've never got this book, you really need to get it. Order it on Amazon. Here's the topic heads, right? Like you can tell what he's going to talk about. Odysseus and Moses, the leader of a people on an arduous multi-year journey home, has a personal relationship with God. This is both for the Odyssey and for the Exodus. So Odysseus and Moses parallel in this exact feature, right? The next one he covers. The people chafe as a lengthy delay in one place exacerbates their difficulties. Unusual meteorological phenomena accompany the lengthy delay. The followers exhibit rebellious tendencies in earlier episodes. Both groups have difficulty enduring hunger or thirst. If you go read the Odyssey, the new movie's coming out soon. They might even show this episode in the Odyssey. With their leader absent, the people rebel. Moses is gone on the mountain for 40 days. Odysseus is gone on a mountain for 30 days. And it might say that here. The people follow another leader, Eurylochus and Aaron. He is a relative of the main leader. Aaron is the relative of Moses, Eurylochus of Odysseus. In earlier episodes, Eurylochus and Aaron work with the protagonists. Eurylochus and Aaron lead the people in a ritual offense to God. Performing the ritual violates a divine interdiction. And then they're quoting, okay. The ritual which accompanies a feast is a parody of a true ritual. The rebels are fully aware that they are committing a wrong. Both myths feature discussion of a temple to be built. Odysseus and Moses returning perceive the people's transgression from a distance. The wrathful God threatens apocalyptic destruction in a divine council. It's like there's a really long comparison here. Odysseus and Moses are spared, having taken no part in the ritual. The golden calf scene with Moses, the eating of Apollo's cattle on Thrinakia. Though a participant in the rebellion, Aaron lives while Eurylochus dies. And there's a reason Aaron has to live in the biblical account. So there's a difference. Why? Gets explained. The Odyssey may offer the more traditional form of this mythic type, meaning it's likely older. Other Old Testament instances of the same genre of myth. So there's other stories within the Old Testament. Rebellion of the Trojan women at Aeneid, and then he goes into the Aeneid. And then chapter 11 gets into the suitors and the depiction of impious men in wisdom literature. So changes topics. I just wanted to show you that. I thought you might appreciate how deep Bruce Loudon will get into these comparisons. As I have, I really value his brilliant scholarship. And it's unfortunate he died, because I would be all over that and sharing that with the world. We got a super chat. J. Keith Banks, thank you so much for that super chat, my friend. What's your background? How did you get this wealth of knowledge and build your connections? How long have you been doing this? Great question. My background, I was a very, very fundamentalist, zealous Christian young man who I think just really obsessed over my Christianity and my religious background. I don't know. I imagine for reasons that might deal with trauma. I don't know what really drove me deep into my faith, but I wanted to know what the truth was. I've always been inquisitive, even as a believer. I wanted to understand, and that's why I changed my denominations throughout the years, as I kept critiquing and being willing to self-critique my own paradigm, and then moved to a different one that I thought was more accurate based on the Bible. My foundation was the Bible, right? But then once you get to the foundation, you start questioning that. then, you start to go from there. So, I have a few years in Bible college. Nothing important. Is a fundamentalist Bible college. Never went to even seminary. Got 2 years associate's degree in an insignificant, not really big thing. I learned more reading commentaries than I did from the college, to be honest. I mean, I learned categories and how to look at things in some ways that the college taught me, but that was it. As far as how did I get this wealth of knowledge, I think just reading books and interviewing scholars. I will say this, before I started doing this on YouTube, which was about 8 or 9 years ago, I started this channel. I was working a construction job, and I was a manager, a supervisor of many people. We did renewable energy, and I was in charge of heavy equipment group of men that drove pile drivers. They huge hammers that would nail I-beams into the ground in the middle of farms, and then we would install solar panels on top of those. So it was an outdoor, very physical, laborious job. I used to be one of the laborers and then worked my ass off and ended up becoming a supervisor. Well, that gave me time to manage watching and making sure that quality control, people were being safe, managing the men and stuff with Bluetooth in my ear. And people could call, I'd hit it, hey, but I would have podcasts going endlessly in my head for 3.5 years while I worked at this company. And those podcasts included a lot of interviews, lots of scholars that were already on YouTube. But I felt like there was something missing. There wasn't enough of it. And it's a passion of mine. I'd spend every day, even when I got out of work, I'd go to my hotel that night because we traveled for work, missing my family. I was away from home, which is also another reason why my work ethic in this is so important. I'm so passionate and driven to try and make this happen because I don't want to go back to a job on the road. I want to be at home with my family. So I'm in the hotel room watching videos at night, watching these interviews when I can actually visibly watch them. Next day, same thing, 3.5 years. During that 3.5 years, I started MythVision, and I would bring my Mac computer with me on the road. And I'd sit in my hotel room with the worst internet possible, and I would try to interview some people. You could go back to the earliest videos I have, crappy internet, but I was fascinated with the question of, is the Bible history? Did Jesus even exist? Those were one of the main ones initially. Did Moses exist? Understanding the Bible within mythology and comparing it to mythology, all of this stuff. And because I saw that this was lacking on the internet, I decided I'm going to do something about it. And I was doing more and more interviews. And then I got a job working for a rehab where I was helping people who were struggling with addiction to get into rehab, to help them clean up their lives. Because I also have a past, 10 years, almost 11 now. I was hooked on heroin. It started with painkillers a decade before that. So I was helping drug addicts struggling with addiction, getting help to improve their lives. And then COVID-19 hit. When COVID-19 hit, I already had the channel. I was already doing interviews, but I got laid off from my job working from home. I'm no longer at the construction job, working from home. I'm interviewing scholars, doing interviews for MythVision, but I'm also helping drug addicts get into rehab. When the flights shut down during COVID-19 and you couldn't get people to travel to the rehab, they laid me off. First time I ever was laid off in my life. And I worked enough on my YouTube channel to grow something of a momentum that when I got laid off, I applied for unemployment. It took them 9 months to even compensate me. And I just said, I'm going to put all my eggs into the basket of building what we're doing here. And so I started building it. And I put everything I had into making this possible. And here we are today. And this has become a full-time gig where I literally lay my heart on my sleeve. I am absolutely transparent, just trying to kick ass, take names, and educate people the best I know how with critical scholarship that I see lacking where it should be out there. And since then, many critical scholars have stepped forward and became public-facing scholars. And it's been an amazing sight to see that more and more people are now being able to have access to critical scholars at their fingertips. Before that, there was very few scholars that are critical that were public on YouTube, on these social media platforms, doing any of this stuff. And I do think in some way, indirectly or directly, we played a role 9-8 years ago on YouTube saying, stop letting the apologetic world dominate these spheres, get in there and bring in the big guns, bring in the critical scholarship, because it's lacking. And sure enough, that's changing, and it's continuing to change day by day. Sorry for the long story, but you're the first person I think that's ever asked me that question that way in the history of this channel. And great question. I had to elaborate. So thank you. Really appreciate that. Means a lot. Of Alan Min one. I hope I'm saying that right. Of Al and Min one. Thank you for becoming a member of the channel. You'll get early access to any of the videos that I produce, interviews and stuff that I launch early on the channel. Thank you. And you'll have a special symbol next to your name, which just makes you elite MythVision. You're part of the family now. Welcome. I do read emails, and I get a ton of them. And if I've read it and I've passed by, don't give up on me. If you've ever sent me emails and you said, oh, he's ignored it, try again. It's probably buried. I always encourage people to do that, because I've probably received 5 to 10 emails since doing this live stream, maybe more. It's pretty busy. Can I do your solar panels? Can I do? Dude, I had a dream the other day that I was doing them in the field. I miss the outdoors. I'm not going to lie. Like, I miss the field, the morning dew and the grass and the sun and there's something about nature. I miss that. I do. I don't get outside enough. So since I do this, I have to keep my health up by going to the gym every morning and trying to sweat and work out to keep myself from, getting out of shape and being unhealthy, and mental health wise too. One of the things people don't realize, you think, oh, you got the life, you're doing great, you're a YouTuber. There's something of a blessing in this, but there's a massive curse too, because your identity gets wrapped up in how many views am I getting? How much money am I making? Because you're trying to provide for your family. And if you put a lot of work into one video and it flops, and let's say your viewers are just not tuning in, they're not watching it, it can be depressing. It sucks. I mean, it really, really can be it can control your emotions, because your whole family depends on you. And so it's been rough. I'm not going to lie. It's been rough. It's a different kind of stress than what I ever dealt with, laboring outdoors and killing my body, trying to take care of my family. It's a mental game. So that's why I always encourage you want to see us succeed, you want to help me, and you can't afford any way of super chats and Patreon, like every video you come across, share every video you can to your audience if you can, comment on every one of them. This is the freest, best way to help my channel succeed, is that YouTube knows you care. YouTube wants you to care. That's all they want me to do, is to convince you that you care. If you're not liking and sharing and commenting, you don't give a shit. And YouTube realizes that, and they go, oh, okay, well, they realize you watched it. So they go, okay, there's watch time, but the interaction, they want to see you active in the comment section. They want to see you thrive. And if you go watch successful apologist channels, they're probably successful because they're doing a lot of poop throwing debate kind of stuff often. And that gets a lot of interaction in the comment section. The more comments we have, the more interaction, the healthier the channel. YouTube rewards us. So that's encouragement for anyone who thought, maybe I'll drop a comment today. Comment. Argue with each other. I don't care. That's why you'll hear me say, hey, press 1 in the comment if you've enjoyed this, or if you like this or whatever during a live stream. When I say press 1, I'm asking you to interact, so YouTube will pay attention and share this to more people. That helps us grow. Again, thank you for the super chat. Of Al and Min 1, thank you again for being a member and the super chat. Derek, you might want to find mine. You might be the first to break the hypothesis. It's about Josephus and the Gospels. Very thematical to what you are making your videos as of late. Interesting. Okay, I will have to dig. What is your email? What is your email? Razor, I'm about to head off too, so don't sweat it. Basically, just take live calls while showing your material, Derek. Oh, okay. That's what you were referring to earlier. Yeah, I get you. Well, for the documentaries, showing a movie while taking live calls doesn't seem to make the most sense to me. But maybe showing pieces of it if I think it's relevant. I just think live calls are interactive, and that's why a lot of people do like them. Dennis says, Derek, you're one of the better hosts on the net. Thanks, man. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it. I really appreciate the compliment. I try to, be the best I know how to be. I watched MythVision in those days, or with those early days. He had another dude named Luther with him. Yeah, Luther G. Williams. Bakken's still catching up. Yeah, Luther and me probably, I don't know. He never said anything to me. He just dropped off the map and decided to not have anything to do with it. So I think I took a different skeptical approach. Luther still held on to esoteric mysticism and belief, right? And I had nothing against that. I just was taking a much more critical, skeptical approach. And I don't think he liked that, if I were guessing. My honest guess. And for those who know me, know that I don't really care if you have beliefs at the end of the day, as long as you're not harming people. That's it. But I think he just felt I was getting a little too chip on my shoulder, skeptical, maybe. I don't know. We never got a chance to talk about it. Dan typing 1. Dan's putting a 1 in the chat. Helping out. Thank you, Dan. Anyway, look, I need to go to the queen of MythVision. She is everything. Without her, we don't have this. And she is throbbing from getting her tooth drilled today. I really, really appreciate all of you. Love you. If you like what we're doing, come around. Try to get to the live streams early. Interact, comment, share, like. All of these things can help. And the longer you watch my videos, even if you mute them and tune them in the background, it helps the channel. Tell Asherah we said hey. Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. She will be thankful for that. By the way, she loves when people recognize and know that she's there. And because she's in the background, she's the bedrock. She's the foundation of this. I would not have MythVision if it weren't for her. None of this would be possible if it weren't for the Queen of Heaven, literally. Spectral said, go do your thing, bro. Absolutely. Mana said, respect, peace. Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. I love you. Like this video, share it. Let's do this more often. I'm glad you liked the documentary. Until next time, never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.